Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So finally we have reached the end of the year and the time has come to reflect on all of 2019's movie releases and rank the very top 10 films of the entire year. Yes, that does in fact mean that this video and this video alone is the sole reputable source for the best films of 2019. Every other video is incorrect because this is the only correct list of the best films of 2019 on YouTube. Now this video does have a special place in my heart because my very first video here on YouTube was my best movies of 2018 list. Having said that, I will give the exact same disclaimer that I did in that previous video, which is that I have not seen every single movie that was released in 2019. It's just impossible for me to have seen all of them. There are some that haven't even been released in the UK yet, so just keep that in mind. Perhaps there are a few titles in your minds that you might not see in this video, and if that's the case, write them down in the comments below. Give me your lists of the best movies of 2019. Your list will be categorically incorrect, but at least you'll get a chance to express your feelings. Another disclaimer that I wanted to give is that there might be a few minor spoilers during my brief reviews of these films. I tried to keep as many spoilers as possible out so that you guys can go check them out if you've never heard of these films or you haven't watched them yet. But just a fair warning, there might be a few spoilers. And as a final disclaimer, there are a few videos that I'm going to be diving into with a little bit more detail than others, simply because I have reviews for those other films already on my channel, which I'll make sure to link down in the description box below if you want to hear my thoughts, my more detailed thoughts on those films. So without further ado, let's get into the list of the best movies of 2019. At number 10 on my list, we have The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. So this is a beautiful, inspirational story about a boy called William who lives in Malawi. And during this time, the country is going through such severe droughts that his family farm is unable to produce any crops whatsoever. And during this film, which is based on a true story, William is able to use his intelligence and ingenuity and determination to create this windmill, which is able to power an electric water pump, which can then bring the water to the surface and enable the crops to grow on his father's farm. So firstly, I wanted to highlight that this is Chiwetel Ejiofor's directorial debut, and he also stars in the film as the father. He also wrote it and produced it. So this is very clearly a passion project for him. Like, he saw this story and he really wanted to bring it out there, and I'm very thankful for Netflix because they were able to give him a platform in order to do so. And again, this is such a beautiful, inspirational story about how hard work and strong will and passion can really help people accomplish anything that they set their minds to, even when they have so little resources. I really appreciated the exploration of how such a horrible natural disaster can affect so many lives in so many different ways. Food is just the tip of the iceberg. People's lives were turned completely upside down due to this drought, and this film very much explores the different ways in which that occurred and how the ingenuity that William had really brought a sense of hope in that community, as well as giving them the possibility to produce more resources, more food for themselves. And speaking of William himself, I did want to highlight the incredible performance of Maxwell Simba in this film, in his debut performance. I think he portrays his character fantastically. I love the relationship that he had with his family in this film. His mother was also excellently portrayed. I'll have the actress's name over here on the screen. I just think all around the performance here were fantastic. They really built a beautiful family dynamic, a community dynamic, which of course had its faults, it had its difficulties, but everyone in the end came together to support this genius kid who really utilized the minimal resources that he had in order to maximize the effects that he could bring to his community. Next up, at number 9, we have Joker. Now this is a film that was so highly anticipated throughout the year, especially when those excellent trailers came out. Everyone wanted to know exactly what Todd Phillips' take would be on this legendary character, and it's one of the few films that definitely delivered on that hype. I think it was a fantastic exploration of this very unique iteration of the Joker, and I especially enjoyed this film because of its unflinching exploration of mental illness from all these different perspectives. We had this from a social, political perspective, from a financial perspective, but also from the perspective of an unreliable narrator. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail when it comes to this film because I I already have a full review of it, which again, I will link down in the description box. But this film is able to touch on these topics so well, and on top of that, you have this incredibly stylistic, incredibly visually appealing and interesting world. And at the center of this world, you have this incredible character who is inexplicably likable and sympathetic whilst also being a violent villain. And it certainly helps that we have Joaquin Phoenix giving a fantastic performance in order to portray this character. The film does an excellent job of just building up tension and building up all of these circumstances that Arthur has to endure until it's inevitable. You feel for him, you empathize with him. And of course, you have the excellent performance by Joaquin Phoenix being able to portray all of these different elements of this complex character. And speaking of excellent performances, at number 8, we have Marriage Story. Now, this is another film that I already reviewed on my channel, but just to reiterate what I said in that video, Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson are just fantastic. They are able to really capture all of the different emotional turmoils that these characters go through throughout this horrible, arduous journey of divorce. The actors are really able to toe the line between portraying the flaws and the dark side of each of these characters, whilst at the same time making them very sympathetic and likable at times as well. And this is so important because even though they go through such ugliness and they show some of their ugly sides during this entire process, you still remember that ultimately what they want is a functioning family life for their child, and it's something that you can get behind, it's something that you can root for. The film itself is brilliantly written, and it provides us with this heartbreaking, ruthless look into the breakdown of one relationship in order to form another one. And unlike a ton of other films about relationship breakdowns, I was fully enraptured in this story, and I actually started to care about these characters more so than I usually do when it comes to films of this nature. But there are a few downsides of this film that don't really elevate it higher on my list. I did mention in my review that I wasn't the biggest fan of how the child himself was treated in this film. Firstly, I didn't love his personality, but that's besides the point. I also didn't love how his parents essentially didn't really take into account his wishes and desires in this whole divorce process. And it didn't seem like the film was trying to intentionally comment on the fact that the parents didn't really know what the child wanted or didn't really seem to care. So in the end, it just came across as a glaring omission. At number 7, we have Klaus. Now, I remember mentioning in one of my previous videos that I have not been overly impressed by the animation offerings that we've had in 2019. Whilst I very much enjoyed Toy Story 4 and How to Train Your Dragon 3, neither of these films really stood out to me as some of the best high quality animated films that I've seen in the past. And of course, this was made even more apparent because just last year we had the release of one of the very best animated films of this decade in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. In comparison to that film, all of these other animated films just felt like more of the same. They didn't feel unique or special in any real way. Until that is, I stumbled across this film called Klaus on Netflix, and I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed this film. Now, of course, much like the other animated films that I reviewed this year, the animation here is absolutely stunning. But what's different here is that the style of animation is very distinctive. It's very unique. Unlike some of the animation that we've seen from DreamWorks and from Pixar, here we have a completely different character design. The world is set up entirely differently, and it just looks, again, very distinct, which is kind of what I'm looking for these days when it comes to animation projects. This film also has an excellent voice cast with J.K. Simmons voicing Klaus himself, and this combined with the excellent writing just brings these characters to life. But above all, what truly impressed me about this film was the story. I think the story is fantastic. It's perfect for the holidays. We've already missed Christmas, but you can definitely still check this film out because it's just so touching and emotional and personal and universal. This is a story with a message that is so much more authentic, so much more heartfelt in my mind than some of the Pixar offerings that we've had more recently. I just felt like the story here and the message was so much more pure and authentic and completely uncynical. Now, I recently learned that the director of this film, Sergio Pablo, also directed and created the Despicable Me franchise, and I'm a huge fan of the original first Despicable Me film, but this is kind of like a pet passion project for him, and it shows how passionate he was about telling this story. And again, the fact that Netflix was able to give it a platform for people to see from all around the world, I think is absolutely phenomenal. And once more, this is the perfect film for you to watch during the holidays, and I highly recommend it. At number 6, we have Booksmarts. Now, this film was incredibly popular amongst critics. I remember when this film was released in the US, critics were begging audiences to go see this film to support this smaller project so that we don't end up with just MCU films in the cinemas all day, every day. So naturally, I just started thinking that this film was overhyped, but I checked it out later on in the year, and I have to say, it's a fantastic comedy. Now, when it comes to American teen comedies, I've never been the biggest fan of them because they're just so unrelatable to me personally. Like films like American Pie and Mean Girls, like these films that have cult following, they are cult classics, and I very much enjoyed them. I think they are funny, but I don't think I connect with them in a way that a lot of Americans who grew up during the time that these films were released and can identify with these periods in time and these cultures in high school kind of appreciate them. I feel like they appreciate them on a different level, whereas I appreciate them as like momentary entertainment, and then I kind of move on with my life because it has nothing to do with me. But in the case of Booksmart, there were so many elements of this film that I was able to identify with my own experience in high school, secondary school, and it really did connect with me on a completely different level. Now, this film to me feels just so much more fresh and relevant to today's society, and it definitely helps that for our main characters, we are following these two amazing girls in Amy and Molly, brilliantly portrayed by Beanie Feldstein and Caitlin Dever. These girls are just so relatable, and they have such a beautiful friendship that you root for them and you hurt when they're hurting. I loved having the snapshot into their final days, their final moments of high school life before they wander off into college or wherever it is they might end up. And I also really appreciated and related to the exploration of the difficulties and the tensions that can bring to the relationships that are formed in high school. And beyond these two girls, I also really enjoyed the side characters. I liked Billy Lord's character, who kept popping out of nowhere throughout the entire film. I thought that was so funny. And I also really enjoyed the rich kid who no one understood. I thought he was so adorable, and I actually like the ending that they gave him. Not to spoil anything, I think it was a really nice ending to the entire film. So next up at number 5, we have Ford versus Ferrari. Now, we are not going to spend too much time on this film because I already have a review of it on my channel, but I thoroughly enjoyed this film, and surprisingly so, because I have absolutely no interest in its subject matter, that I had no idea how fascinating the story of the Le Mans 66 race really was, and I think it was excellently depicted here. And you have, of course, the incredible performance by Christian Bale, who I thought did an excellent job of showing just how passionate, just how much love this person had for cars and for racing and for what he did. His passion was able to supersede any of his unlikable characteristics, which made for such a compelling character that you could root for, that you could sympathize with. Now, this film was very much an intense character study of this person, but beyond that, we also had the racing, and I thought the racing sequences were so dynamic, so thrilling. Again, coming from someone who does not watch racing, I really felt the stakes in this film, and they became real and palpable to me. And in general, this film is beautiful to look at. I think it has some stunning, gorgeous cinematography. So despite the fact that I had no real interest in the subject matter, and I had no idea that Le Mans was even a race going into this film, I just fell in love with this story. I thought it was absolutely brilliantly told, and again, this film is just so picturesque and so stunning that it made for an incredible cinematic experience. At number 4, we have Dolemite Is My Name. Now, this film sees the return of Eddie Murphy, and I think he truly gave a fantastic performance here. He is able to capture all of the different elements of this multifaceted character who longs to be given the opportunity to demonstrate his talent, but this is someone who has reached a particular age and hasn't been able to accomplish half of the things that he really wanted to achieve. This film is able to capture the desperation but also determination of this character as he hits several bumps along the road during his journey to achieving the stardom that he desires. And ultimately you revel, you experience second-handedly the elation when he achieves his success. But what particularly stood out to me was the ending of this film. Now I thought, as I watched it and as I'd experienced the entire film and thought, man, this is fantastic, I predicted that the ending would be that he would get to see his film on the big screen after all of that crowdsourcing, after all of that building up anticipation within the community, which we'll get to in a second. I thought he would be able to finally see himself on the big screen with a big old grin on his face as he watches the fruits of his labor. But what actually happens is just so much better. And this is a small spoiler for Dolemite Is My Name. If you have not seen this film yet, please skip this part as I just talk about the ending for a little bit. But in the end, instead of choosing to go see the film in the theater with his cast, he instead decides to spend time with the people who are supporting him, his true fans, people who are waiting outside of the cinema for their showing of the film. And there's this really long, incredible queue just showing how successful this guerrilla marketing campaign was. And I just really enjoyed the humility of that and the fact that he truly understands that it's because of this support, it's because of his fans that he was able to make his dream come true. But of course, it wasn't just his fans that got him there, because you have the support of the cast and crew. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic how we got to see this insight into guerrilla filmmaking, where you have this cast and crew just meshed together from all sorts of places and all sorts of circumstances. But they do come together. They come together to form this really likable group and community of people all coming together to support this weird and wonderful project. Everyone puts their blood, sweat and tears into this project, and even though the final result isn't personally of my tastes, I still rooted for them to succeed, because you saw their journey getting there and you just want them to have that win after so many losses. Now, from my description, you think that this is a very deep and dramatic film, which it is in moments, but it's also incredibly funny and it has a lot of crass humor, which I don't usually gel with. But Eddie Murphy is just so good in this role, and so is everyone else, that the comedy, even though it's a bit more crass, just kind of transcends any limits and any preconceptions that I may have, and it makes for such an entertaining film as a result. So now we're reaching the top 3 films of my list. We're getting to the creme de la creme of this year. And before we dive into those films, I wanted to bring out some honorable mentions so that we can appreciate some of the other films that almost made it to my list, but not quite. We have The Farewell, Spider-Man Far From Home, The Last Black Man in San Francisco. I thought this film was absolutely fantastic. The only thing that let it down for me was the middle, which kind of felt a bit meandering. I have a thing about meandering films that kind of take their time to get to the point. But I think the beginning and the end of this film is so powerful that it definitely is up there for some of the best filmmaking of this year. The next honorable mention is Honey Boy, which is another fantastic character study. Again, there is a little bit of aimlessness in the middle there, but for the most part I thought it was a very powerful film. It's one of the rare films that doesn't really have a strict 3-act structure where things happen, but at the same time it's able to capture my attention from start to finish, and really it's because of those powerful performances. I thought everyone was fantastic there. Another great performance by Noah Jupe, by the way, who also plays the son in Ford versus Ferrari. He's brilliant. He's phenomenal. But I very much enjoyed this film, despite the fact that it didn't have a strict structure to it. It was just a series of events within Shia LaBeouf's life, which you could reflect on. And I really appreciated that, but there were a few points in the film where I kind of drifted off a little bit. If I'm being strict with my list, I don't think it would make it to my top 10. And the last honorable mention is Jojo Rabbit, which I was very much looking forward to seeing, and I finally got a chance to. And it's a great film, but there are a few shortcomings that just make it shy of fantastic and truly special. I think the raw materials are there, but there's just something about it that didn't blow me away the way that I thought it would. So now that you know what won't be on the rest of this list, let's go through the top 3 films of the year, in my opinion. At number 3, we have The King. Now, this is a bit of a controversial one, I think, because this film didn't really get a lot of attention, but I thoroughly thoroughly enjoyed this film. I got a chance to see this film, the London Film Festival, on the big screen, and it was stunning. Like, it was really, really beautiful. I think the cinematography here is beautiful. It's able to really capture the dourness of the 15th century, and it's able to really build that world in a very convincing and grounded and gritty and ugly way. Now, once again, I already have a review of this film, so I'm not going to dive into it with too much detail, but what I will say is that Timothée Chalamet's performance here is fantastic, brilliant, excellent. I loved him here. Now, I recently saw him in Little Women. I thought he was great there too, but here there's just a different aspect in his persona, his regalness and his seriousness and sincerity in this performance is just on a completely different level. He's also able to convincingly carry out the more action heavy sequences, and he's able to really capture the suffocation and the just overwhelming sense of dread and desperation in the battle sequences in France. And that, of course, is helped by the way that this film is shot. And I said in my review that it's very reminiscent of the Battle of the Bastards from Game of Thrones, but the way that it's carried out is still very effective in conveying just how horrible the situation is and just how dire these battle sequences are. They are literally life or death, and I think this film does an excellent job of showing us why King Henry IV didn't want to go into war, because the consequences were just horrific and the stakes are very much felt here in this film. Now, also, as I mentioned in my review, if you are not a big fan of period pieces like this one, if you're not a big fan of the Game of Throneses or any exploration of, you know, medieval or 15th century politics, it's very specific, this film, you might not enjoy it as much as I did, just simply put. But I really think it was a perfect alchemy of all of these different elements that I thoroughly enjoyed, and it made for a film that really stood out to me during this year. I was actually looking forward to watching it on Netflix, although I do think the impact of the film is lessened and it was much greater on the big screen, where I got a chance to experience it first. Speaking of big screen experiences, of course you knew that this film was coming up, and here it is. At number 2 we have Avengers Endgame. Now, again, I already have reviews, plural, of this film, which you can check out on my channel, but this is such an iconic moment in cinema, in my opinion. This is the most excited that I have ever been for a film ever, and it made for one of the most memorable cinema going experiences of my life. I thoroughly enjoyed watching Avengers Endgame for the first time in the cinema. I think it was just so incredible seeing the culmination of 10 years of such unique storytelling and universe building from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was everything that fans could have hoped for and more. The story was so cleverly written that it facilitated the embedding of Easter eggs and callbacks to previous films, whilst at the same time still making sense as a story on its own. I definitely think that this is a companion piece to Avengers Infinity War. I don't think it quite makes sense on its own, but it does work as a sole film. It's just not as impactful. And it cannot be overstated just how much of a difficult task the Russo brothers and the rest of the creative team behind this film had, balancing all of these incredible characters, these characters that have fan bases, entire fan bases of their own, being able to balance all of them in this single film, as well as all of these story arcs, as well as all of these Infinity Stones and everything surrounding what happened in Avengers Infinity War. It was just such an arduous task ahead of it. And at the end of the day, the argument can be made that this perhaps is not the best made film of 2019, and perhaps it's not quite as artistic. I personally disagree with that whole artistic comment because of just how challenging this whole thing was, and to add an emotional impact that will affect millions, literally millions of people all around the world. How is that not artistic? Anyway, I digress. I do think that whilst it may not be considered the best made film of 2019, I guarantee you, you are most likely to rewatch this film than you are a Jojo Rabbit or a Honey Boy. As much as those films are great on their own, this one had an impact. This one is definitely one for the record books. Literally, because it became the highest grossing film of all time. And finally, we have reached the very end of my list, and I'm about to reveal the very best film of 2019, the film that I think was above all else in terms of what 2019 had to offer. And at number 1, we have Parasite. So we've gone from a huge international juggernaut in Avengers Endgame to a much smaller but no less international success in Parasite. Now, if you haven't seen Parasite, I think this film is best enjoyed just going in cold, having no background knowledge on what this film is about, so I'm not going to reveal anything here whatsoever. But what I will say is that this is a very small and contained film that's able to express this story and this message with some style, but not too much flashiness. This film has some excellent performances. I think individually the actors do an excellent job in their roles, but I think the film really shines when their performances come together in order to portray this family unit. I buy them as a family, I buy the bonds between them, and I really root for them in their situation, and it makes it so much more powerful in the film when you have these characters that you can really root for and you can really understand. And speaking of understanding, this is a non-English South Korean film, so I couldn't understand a word that they were saying. I was reading subtitles, but really it didn't even register when I was watching this film because the message here is just so poignant and it's so universal and relevant to today's society. And it's delivered so precisely and accurately with no fancy frills kind of distracting from this core message. Bong Joon-ho is able to hit the mark perfectly when it comes to the core message of this film, whilst also producing something that is truly entertaining and engaging. It's littered with all of these tense, awkward and uncomfortable moments, whilst also having true moments of levity and comedy. And I think the fact that it just always keeps you guessing leaves you so thoroughly engaged in the story, and the way that the story is delivered is so artful. That's what makes this film the film that really stood out to me in 2019, and I think the best film of the entire year. So that's it from me. Now that I've told you guys my top 10 films of 2019, it's time for you guys to let me know what your lists are down in the comments below. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and if you've checked out any of my other videos throughout this year, I really truly appreciate it. I had a great time making videos for you guys this year, and I look forward to another year of creating YouTube content. So be sure to like and subscribe if you want to catch new videos from this channel. Thank you again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.